Okay, we are recording. Okay, Camille, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then I have a couple questions I wanted to ask, and then we're going to turn it over to students for some Q&A. Sound good?
Yep, sounds like a plan. Well, I appreciate everyone having me today. So my name is Camille Dhennin. I am a talent acquisition partner, aka recruiter, for a company called FoodChain ID. So we specifically work in the food industry, looking at testing, certification, and digital solutions for your food products. So if you're at the grocery store and you see something with like a non-GMO label on it, about an 85% chance we had something to do with that process. Before that, I actually worked for ASU. I was at ASU for almost 6 years, where I worked in housing at the West Campus in Glendale, as well as advising for the WP Carey School of Business. So I'm very familiar with ASU, and I know you all are you all in LA, correct?
Yeah.
So with ASU Local, and I'm happy to spend some time with you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. So we're gonna ask you some questions about maybe some strategies or like insider tips you might have for our students who are, looking for jobs or internships or updating their LinkedIn. And one question that often comes up is we have students who might be working at a shoe store or a coffee shop or someplace, and the job they have doesn't really necessarily align with the industry or major that they're trying to focus on. Do you have any advice about kind of translating experience from their part or full-time job to kind of the direction they want to go in their career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the first thing I'll tell you is everything that you're doing at a job is going to be related to another job, whether it is explicit or not. So if you work at a shoe store and your job is stacking shoes, right? On your resume, you don't write stacked shoes. You would write something along the terms of organized inventory for clear visibility, or something that makes it show that you're using your critical thinking and organizational skills in your position. So it's really important when you're looking at your job description of the job that you want to apply for or the major that you're thinking in, looking at that job description and then really seeing, okay, so this bullet point says needs good organizational skills. Okay, what have I done in my current job for those organizational skills that I can highlight on your resume? Your resume doesn't necessarily need to be bullet for bullet the job description that you're currently in right now. So, for instance, when I transitioned from academic advising to recruiting, I didn't put anything about my supervisory experience. I'm not supervising anybody in this role. It doesn't need to be on my resume. Was it important? Yes. Did I enjoy doing it? Absolutely. But that's not what was going to get me the job I was looking for. So it's really important that you're catering, and just because you did it, it doesn't have to be on your resume.
Yeah, great point. So you're looking at the job description and you're kind of catering or tailoring your experiences, no matter what they are, to what it says on the page.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Quick question for the students. Have you ever applied to a job and you have to like fill out stuff online, and then they also ask you to submit your like resume and cover letter, and you're like, hey, I just wrote that like 5 seconds ago. Camille, could you speak to why that is? And any advice you might have for students who are like, hey, oh man, I gotta do this again.
Yeah. So as somebody who has applied for jobs, that's like the literal worst feeling, right? Like, why did I do a resume if I have to just literally retype everything? So usually the reason why that happens is because it's not companies being malicious. It's just that their technology and their systems aren't up to date for the user experience. So I know where I work now, we have eliminated that. That was literally day 3. I was in applications and I was like, get rid of this. It should take no more than 10 minutes, in my opinion, for a person to apply for a job. Now, that's not always the case. So here are some general tips that I say is, you know what you're willing to do. So when I was job searching, I said, I don't want to write cover letters because that takes up a lot of my time, especially since I need to personalize it for every job. So if a job position required a cover letter, I just didn't apply for that job. Does it limit your scope on what you can do, on what jobs you're applying for? Absolutely, right? But you draw your hard lines and what term works out with like your school load, your mental health, your family obligations, all of those things. So yes, you're going to see a lot of, hey, upload your resume and also type this information in. Part of that is also to make sure that the information is correct, because sometimes it'll pull information out of your resume, but it doesn't, the systems, depending on how your resume is formatted, won't pull that information correctly. And so it's a way for you to double and triple check your information to make sure that there's some accuracy in there. And that just helps the recruiters. Sometimes there's only one recruiter for a company. Sometimes you have 5 recruiters for one position. It just depends on the position and what size company you're applying for. And so it just helps them keep that information organized, and it's all based on what applicant tracking system they use.
Yeah, we had a question.
Yes.
So, hi, Camille, I'm Suzette. So I'm glad you mentioned the application tracking system. Because it's been a long time since I've actually applied for a job online. And from what I recall or was told in the past is that typically there's like an algorithm as far as when you're applying for a job, and there's certain keywords or phrases in relation to the position that you need to use in correlation with it. Can you expand upon that, please?
I'm so glad you asked me this question. There is no such thing as the magical ATS that can automatically scan your resumes and tell you if you're qualified for the job or not. If there was, companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft, these huge tech companies, would not have recruiters. And yet we still exist. So there's definitely, they do have knockout questions. So for instance, are you authorized to legally work for this company in the United States? That's going to be a knockout question. If you don't have authorization to work in the United States for that company, yeah, your application is going to be automatically filtered out. So there are some knockout questions like that, but it's never going to be, did their resume include the key words of food, beverage, and safety? That won't be the case. A recruiter reads every resume that's not automatically knocked out by something like, are you over 18? Are you legally required, able to work in the US? You know, if you're applying for a remote job, are you living in one of the states that we employ people in? So there is no magic ATS that eliminates resumes. There are knockout questions, but those aren't going to be based on your resume. They're going to be based off of you, basically.
But doesn't the Camille, because I was told this by a county public health employee, and doesn't like the federal government and like government, don't they use an algorithm type of system? I'm a former recruiter myself. Don't they use algorithm systems?
I'm not overly familiar with the government systems. I don't work in that sector. So there is a chance that they could have some sort of algorithm, but it's not going to automatically like eliminate a bunch of resumes, because you also have to take into account the bias that can come in what they're programmed with. So typically speaking, anything that they're putting in for elimination is specifically requested to like, are you baseline eligible to work for this position? There's also things such as, if this position requires 5 years experience and you don't have 5 years experience, that might get automatically knocked out too. But those are questions that typically we call them knockout questions, and they're entered, you manually enter the answers to those.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Great question. Does anyone else have a question related to tracking systems or
not tracking system?
Oh, well, anyways.
Okay. Hi. I don't know. Okay, there you are. Hi. My question is, does it matter when you apply? So let's say the application goes live at 12 p.m. and I apply 2 weeks from that. Does that matter?
That's a great question. The answer is it depends. Some positions, particularly big corporations, you got to get in there within that first 24 to 48 hours. Those are positions that you're running to. Because they're getting hundreds and hundreds of applications at the same time, they will close the application system, because with 700 candidates, we're bound to find somebody. That's the thought process behind that. Now, if you're looking more like, look at ASU, for example, ASU, they keep the job position open regardless of how many they have until the deadline that they have posted on there. So some positions will have deadlines on there, some won't. Typically speaking, if you're looking at a corporate position, you do want to apply as quickly as possible. Now, that being said, if it's still open 2 weeks later, it doesn't mean don't hit submit, right? But it just means you're more likely to be seen the earlier you apply, just depending on what sector it's in.
Thank you.
You mentioned kind of applying to jobs as soon as you can. So we encourage our students to network, and we give them opportunities to do so. Some of the students are working on a project now where they need to find a professional in their career, conduct an informational interview to kind of build their network a bit. Sometimes we're in the case of we see a job, we apply to it, and we're like, is there a way to like network right now real quick? Like, do I message people before I apply? Should I apply first and then try and find someone at the company? Is that even appropriate to do so? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, that's a great question. I have lots of thoughts on this topic. So the first thing I would say is networking never hurts, as long as you do it appropriately, right? So if you are applying for a job at JP Morgan and Chase, and you are applying for a bank teller position, you don't want to reach out to the hiring manager or the recruiter for an engineering person. That makes no sense. And that shows that you have not done research into the job to show who I am actually supposed to be reaching out to. So if you are going to reach out, you need to make sure you're reaching out to the right person. You also want to make sure that you are polite, but getting to the point. So recruiters will frequently, get messages, 20 to 50 messages in a day from candidates when positions are open. And so they do their best to go back in and respond to all of those, but it's also a lot to respond to, plus their regular, 40 hours of job responsibilities they have to do in a week. So when you are doing that outreach, you want to make sure you're introducing yourself, what position, and then what specific question you have. Sending a message that says, hey, Camille, I just applied for this job. Looking forward to talking to you soon. That just junks up my email box. And it's great that you took the time to reach out, but that's not actually going to do anything. If it's more like, hey, Camille, I just applied for this specific position. Can you tell me about this and XYZ thing that you saw in the job description that you have questions about? That makes it a lot more specific of, hey, they've done their research, they couldn't find this answer, I'm going to take the time to respond to it, versus like, hey, just sending you an email so that I stick out in the bunch of names. That doesn't quite work. So you want to make sure you're being intentional about the outreach that you are giving to the recruiters and to the managers. Typically speaking, I do recommend messaging the recruiters before you message the managers, given what information is available, right? If only the manager's information is available, then go ahead and do that. But why I say the recruiters is the recruiters are always the front lines of the hiring process. And so they're going to see your name and your information probably a week or two before a manager, it comes across a manager's desk. So you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the right person. It's not to say if you reach out to the wrong person, they'll say no, but you might get a response that says, hey, this isn't me, sorry, try again. Or, hey, I forward this on to you. Or, hey, this isn't me, please don't reach out. So just make sure you're being intentional about that outreach you're sending.
Really good advice. Suzanne.
Hey, Camille, on Friday, like I live in a community here, and we're doing some community work. And so I reached out. I mean, I was sitting on in a subcommittee with the deputy director of health and housing for LA County, and I told her, like I have to do volunteer work for one of my upcoming classes, and I asked if I could do volunteer work with the agency, and she was like, over the moon excited that I wanted to do volunteer work with them. And so, so I'm, having conversations with her now about maybe next quarter doing my volunteer work with them. Do you think like this, doing that can open a door for any opportunities beyond my volunteer work?
Absolutely. So volunteer work is a great way to get your foot in the door, especially if you're kind of breaking into an industry that you don't have a lot of experience in, but are super interested in. And here's why. So the first is you're already building your network. You're saying, hey, I have this time, I have this free labor, let me give it back to you. So the first step is you're showing initiative. You're starting to build that network. But what you don't think about sometimes is the people that you're going to meet while you're volunteering. So you're going to meet other volunteers, you're going to meet other managers, other directors, other things like that. And those are all opportunities to build up networks, even if it's what, people may consider a shallow network, which is, hey, we met once. But hey, we met once is enough to say, hey, Daniel, we met once. I don't know if you remember us picking up trash off of the side of the 405 this one day. But I have interest in this thing and I really enjoyed working with you. Can we grab a coffee or can we set up a time to chat more about XYZ opportunity or XYZ field? So you are building those networks, and that's a great way to build those networks and those networks within networks when you're doing volunteering and internships and things like that.
Thank you, Camille.
Yeah, great point. And do you encourage people when they add someone on LinkedIn, whether they've met them before or not, to you have an option when you connect with them to write a note? Any thoughts on if that's a good idea to do that or what you might say in that blurb?
Yes. So I always encourage a note because I'm at a point where if I don't recognize your name, I don't add you in LinkedIn unless there's some sort of context, right? So even if it's, hi, Camille, I recently applied for XYZ job. I'm very interested in the food industry. I'm looking forward to connecting with you soon. That at least gives me a little context of who you are, why you're reaching out to me. But if you just send empty LinkedIn requests, it almost seems like you're throwing paper at a wall and seeing if it'll stick, right? Just who can I connect with? Who can I connect with? So of course, if it's somebody that you've worked with extensively, if you were all to send Daniel a request, right? He knows who you are. He knows the context of your relationship. Absolutely. You don't necessarily need a note for that. But if you were sending me a note after today, for example, you say, hey, Camille, it was nice to be able to speak with you at the ASU Local event. I am a senior looking to go into XYZ industry. I'm looking forward to connecting later. So just so that, we've met once, right? But sometimes we don't know, I can't possibly know everybody in the room, right? But that's how you start to build those connections, and you're more likely to get accepted if there's some context behind why there's a connection. Even if it's, hey, so-and-so, we've never met before, but I have extreme interest in your field. I have looked at the articles you've written on XYZ. This is why I'm interested in following you. It helps build that connection.
Really good advice.
Can I mention one of them?
Please.
Oh, go ahead. No, she's
No.
I have a question. Hi, I'm just a voice at this point. What are some red flags that you would say when you see a job listing? What are some red flags of jobs that you would just not want to apply?
That is a good question. So I will tell you personally, my first red flag is not posting salary, which I will say is the pot calling the kettle back because my company does not post salaries on their job postings. But I wholeheartedly disagree with it, and they know I do. But posting your job salaries, I think for me, I need to know that they can afford me. And it's not a question of I'm begging for this job or whatever. It's just, this is how much money I have calculated that I need to make to live the lifestyle that I want to make. You either can or cannot do that. It's that simple. So that is for me. Some people want to take risk, and that is okay. That's perfectly fine. Other things on job descriptions that are problematic is if you see contradictory information. So if it says this position works 9 to 5, and then later it says, oh, you need to be flexible to work weekends, but there's no reason that you would need to work weekends. So for instance, at ASU, we work with students. You guys have events on weekends, right? It makes sense that yes, we work 9 to 5, but occasionally you have weekend events. Some positions, like if you're working in IT, why do you need to work on weekends? It doesn't compute. So you want to make sure that like there's the things are consistent in the job description. You also want to see if they mention anything about like, we pay you through PayPal, or we pay you through like currency that's not US dollars or anything like that. That's also a red flag. Assuming you're not applying for a position in a foreign country, right? Like if you're applying for a job in France and they pay in euros, that's not a red flag that they don't pay in US dollars, right? But those are things to keep in mind. I would also be wary of very short job descriptions. So if a job description only has 4 bullet points, I promise you, you're not only doing 4 things in a job for 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year. So you want to make sure that the job descriptions have some girth to them and have some length. And if they don't, then, and the job still sounds interesting, that's something that you should be asking the recruiter about when you're having a phone screening or you're chit-chatting with them. That's something of like, can you please provide a complete job description? And if they say that's the complete job description, that's a red flag, because you're getting ready to sign up for things that you're not knowing you're signing up for.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also, I had a class last quarter and justice, disability and advocacy. And I had some really cool professors that I never even met them via Zoom. Like we just had regular conversations all throughout the quarter via emails and messages in the course profile. But anyway, I was really excited that like a week after the course, they connected me with another professor through ASU who invited me to speak at a forum next February at ASU Tempe. And, I'm a poetess, so they invited me to be part of their panel discussion as well as perform. And, they're going to fly me in, they're going to take care of my housing for, and also they're paying me a stipend for speaking and so forth. And so I just wanted to maybe ask if you could elaborate on how we could currently like use our connections within ASU as, like we're in school and building relationships with our professors and so forth.
Absolutely. And congratulations on your speaking gig. That's really cool. So your faculty members have experience in the industry, right? ASU picks the top professionals to come teach for you, which is really cool for A, because you're learning from the best, but B, it's also an opportunity of like, if you're interested in business, right? Talk to your business professors about what it's like in the actual field, about what the opportunities are, about what the trends. They are not ignorant of what is happening, even though they're in the academic field. Many of them are still doing research and work in that field in addition to teaching. They're busy people, but they also like talking about themselves and they like talking about the things that they're interested in. We all do. It's human nature. So really don't be afraid to tap into that. Probably when you were in your first year orientation, they told you, go to your professor's office hours. It's super important to build those connections. It's important for you to go to those office hours and build those connections, particularly as you are in your sophomore and junior years, because that's when you're starting to look for your internships. That's when you're starting to be in your major specific courses instead of, English 105 or whatever your math course you placed into that at that time. So you really want to make sure that you're utilizing your time. And the professors have that office hours, and most of the time they're sitting around doing nothing because nobody comes to them. So, and it can start off as a simple, hey, I have a question about this assignment. By the way, you said this interesting thing in class. Can you elaborate more on that? Because I think that this is cool because of this. So you don't need to go in with like a 14 bullet point agenda of like, okay, I have 10 minutes. I need to cover all of these topics and build the network in the first meeting, or else it's over and there's no point in doing this anymore. So it's going to take some time on your part to nurture those relationships, but going to those office hours, using your faculty, those are great connections that get you in the business. But you also have more than your just faculties. You have your student clubs and organizations. You know, ASU has, yes, your traditional students who came in right at 18, but you also have people who are returning to school, who've studied abroad, who've done all sorts of things. So your fellow peers have connections. Your people who are staff, so your academic advisors, your enrollment coaches, your activities planners, all of those have some connections as well. And whether it's not, hey, I don't directly work in the business, but I know a person who does and I can connect you to them. Those are the things that are going to help you when you're building your networks that you can use right now while you're at ASU.
Love it. Yeah, that's really good advice too. And like your academic life and your professional life are supposed to be interwoven. They're not supposed to be separate avenues where you just go to school and then you work on the side. The whole idea is that they are interwoven pathways.
Let me just add one quick. ASU hosts so many career events that are super value, but it's things like, so when I was an undergrad, I studied international relations. So when the FBI came to campus to talk about FBI internships, that was something that I was on the money. It was in my calendar, triple circled, like nothing was going to stop me. So working with your major to know what events are happening for careers that you may be interested in is also very valuable, because even if you're not networking, you're learning more about the specifics of what roles are important.
Totally. And you can find virtually all those on Handshake under the events section, and there's tons of them that are remote, so you don't need to be actually in Tempe to attend. Okay, I want to get back to the salary question, because this is something that comes up with students a lot. You mentioned it being a red flag if they don't post it. I believe in California, New York, some other states, it is a law that they have to put in a good faith salary range on the job description. Do you have any advice for negotiating your salary? So you applied, you had the interview, HR maybe or yourself reaches out, hey, we'd like to extend an offer, and now like it's your time to maybe discuss more specifics about what that compensation package might look like.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the first thing I tell you is that your salary negotiation begins before you apply for a job. Like, you need to know what salary you want when you're applying for a position. So if you know that you need to make $100,000, then you know you need to make $100,000. So you have to be able to come up with whatever that number is for you right out the bat, because most of the time in the first interview you have, they're going to ask you what your salary requirements are. And saying things like, I'm flexible, or I don't have a specific number, or, you know, whatever the market pays doesn't work. You will get lowballed on an offer. And to me, it shows, well, they don't know what they want, so I can offer them whatever I want to. So you want to make sure you have a specific number, and don't be afraid to share that number. If they can't afford you, they can't afford you. You move on to something else. It's that simple. So don't be shy. If your number is $50,000, do not feel bad about saying $50,000 when they ask you on the phone. So that's the first thing, is to know your number. The second thing is, as you go through the interview process, you want to pay a lot of attention to what the interviewers are telling you. What's important about the job? What specifically are they looking for? Because when you get ready to negotiate the salary, you're going to talk about what value you add to each of those things that are super important to what they do. So if they mention, we absolutely need somebody with experience working in a digital remote solution. Okay, so I work I have worked remote for X amount of years. I have this expertise. This is something that I can highlight when I'm doing my interviews, A, to see if they just bump up the offer naturally without me having to negotiate, and B, so that when I go to negotiations, I can say, based off of my experiences and what you need, I have XYZ, and this is why my number should be this and not what you have offered me. The third piece of advice I would say when negotiating your salary is knowing that the number of your salary is not the only thing that you can negotiate. So yes, money is important. Money is what pays the bills, but you can also negotiate benefits. You can negotiate paid time off. You can negotiate extra vacation days or sick days. You can negotiate work schedule. I want to work 4 10-hour days versus 5 8-hour days. Sorry, I messed the numbers up in my head. But you can negotiate things like your schedule. So, or you can negotiate, okay, I see this position is hybrid. I want to do 2 days in the office versus 4 days, or things like that. So there's other things that you can negotiate beyond the number. So if maybe your number is not getting there, look at the other things that could get to. But again, I don't recommend applying for jobs that don't meet that minimum number. And then lastly, don't be afraid to take a beat when they give you that number. So if I'm calling you on a Thursday afternoon at 4:00 p.m. Pacific time and say, hey, Suzette, congratulations. We want to offer you the job. We're offering you $50,000, but you know your number is $60,000. You can say, gosh, Camille, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to join you. I need to take some time to think about this offer, and I will get back to you tomorrow. You are more than welcome. You do not have to accept the job offer as soon as they give it to you. And in fact, if they say we need an answer now, that is a red flag, because people should give you time to think and negotiate about what you are doing. Now, some companies may come back and say, unfortunately, these are things we cannot negotiate. And that's okay. Like sometimes I know where I work right now, you can't really, we have unlimited PTO. You cannot negotiate unlimited PTO. There's literally nowhere to go from there. But there's other things that you can. And so you want to make sure that you know what those are and really give yourself a chance to think. You need to think. If you have family that you're consulting, you can consult with them. Get back to them within a reasonable amount of time. But it's okay for you to take that time, think, and say, actually, I need $60,000. How can we make this work? And you also want to make sure it's not you versus them. It's about how we make it work as a team to get to this number versus figure it out. You'll get the number right.
You have a question?
Yeah, thank you for sharing on that. My question, she kind of read underneath. What is it?
Nothing. You're underneath the camera. They can see you.
Yeah, I see you.
Okay. My question, not too related to what we were just talking about, but made me think about it. If a resume you see has like lots of short-term job experience, like I don't know, for me, I ignore the red flags of a current job I have, and that I see a deadline of okay, I need to get out by this date. I want to move on, and this is the vision I have. But I feel like in a hiring process, I don't want to like freeze up or sound like complaining, or I don't want to be a red flag for having stayed only for a short amount of time at a job. Do you have any recommendations for navigating that discussion?
Yes, that's a great question. So when you're early in your career, that's not really a red flag. People change jobs every year. You're in college, you're trying new things. It's not as much as a red flag as people think it is. It's also changed since COVID. So the market and recruiting has changed since COVID hit. And the market is very much employee friendly versus employer friendly at the current moment, unless you're going into IT. But my recommendation for that is to have really clear ideas about why you left. So I was working at Starbucks, and then I changed my job in Starbucks to work at a lab on campus. Okay, I learned XYZ skills from Starbucks, but I felt that I wanted to continue to grow specifically in my career field. So I decided to make this change after only 6 months to work in the laboratory because I better felt that that would help me develop in the XYZ skills that I was looking to develop in. So even though your tenure was short, you know how to explain why it was. Now, things that you will never tell a job interview, even though it might be the truth, is I left my job because I hated my manager. I left my job because I didn't get along with my coworkers. I left my job because the work was too hard. You're going to find ways to sugarcoat and spin that because those definitely come off as red flags on the interviewing perspective of if it's like, wow, they were a little too open about how much they hated their last job. What is that attitude going to be like when they come to interview with us? I will say, as you go further in your career, about 2 to 3 years is the average tenure in a position right now that we're seeing on resumes. So that isn't bizarre, but yes, you're right. If you keep if you're 40 years in your career and you've job hopped every year, yeah, that's going to bring up some red flags that people aren't going to be thrilled to interview about. But as you're starting your career, it's not uncommon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left, so we have a couple more questions.
Hi, thank you for sharing all of that. This has been really, really interesting and informative. I have a question about interviews. So sometimes I feel like I overthink interviews and I'm like, I don't want to just information dump and like tell you everything about myself. And then there's also like, I want to come across like positive and stuff. So I guess like what's like an example of an interview that really like stands out and blows you away, or what are the characteristics of like a near perfect interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, what I would consider an interview is a candidate who can keep track of time. So I call you and I say, hey, we have 30 minutes to discuss and I have 10 questions to ask you. You being able to time manage, because if you spend 15 minutes on question 1, then we only have 15 minutes for the other 9 questions. So being able to time manage. Tell me about yourself and why you're interested in this position should take you 2 minutes max to answer. You have to practice it, but it should really take you no more than 2 minutes. Walk me through your resume should take you no more than 3 minutes. You're going through surface level information. The deeper you go in the interview process is the more nitty gritty you need to go. So when you're first talking to recruiters or doing your first interview, yes, you want to give them information, but you don't need to go into the details of when you started walking all the way to your first job selling your lemonade stand and then going from XYZ. They don't care about that. You want to highlight the things that are super relevant to the position that are on your resume and why you're interested in that role. So that's the first thing. The second thing is being able to answer with confidence. Sometimes interviewers will throw curveball questions just to see how you think, or they will follow up on something you said. So an example is we have a manager who loves to ask, why are manholes round? I don't know. There is no right answer. We just want to see your thought process and see the confidence that you have behind that. If you say something like, I feel really confident in my Excel skills, right? And they say, oh, you feel confident in Excel skills. Can you give me an example? Confidently answer an example when you use Excel and you were like super great at it. Like that's perfectly okay. But answering with confidence is key. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you have questions for the interviewer. I recommend 3 at a minimum, depending on what it is. You want to tailor those questions to what makes sense, right? But if you have no questions at the end of an interview, that tends to be a red flag because it's like you really have no questions. You don't want to know about benefits. You don't want to know about what it's like to work here. You don't want to know anything. That's iffy. So always come up with 3 questions to ask in your interviews as well. So your keys are time management, confidence, and be showing interest because you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Amazing insight. Here we have maybe one more question. Sure.
I'm actually piggybacking off of what you just said. regarding asking questions. So what are the most commonly asked questions that an applicant asks a recruiter that you feel is just like just ask way too much and everyone like what would that be, and what would you say is like a good question to ask that's uncommon?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think when you're looking at the questions, for me, the questions that are bad are the questions that you could have easily Googled or were in the job description that had that answer, but you didn't see it. So for instance, we don't post salaries, right? So if you ask, what's the salary for this position? That's not an unnecessary, that's not a ridiculous question because it's not, there's nowhere for you to find that information. But if you ask if there's a 24 on-call rotation and the job description says there's a 24-hour on-call rotation, then those are the questions that are poor. I'd say good questions to ask are specifically about company culture. Tell me about the company culture. Why do you like working here? Those are good questions to ask. A good question to ask is, why wouldn't I work here? Because that really flips it on them to show like, okay, what are things here that would make me not want to work here? So that's a really good question to ask. And I think it's okay to ask, particularly in that phone screening, if you want to ask about the benefits and things like that, that's absolutely, but you want to ask information that's going to give you the information to make an informed decision about a job, particularly if you're in multiple processes.
Thank you. That was a really, yes, that last question. It's a really good one. Why wouldn't I want to work here?
Hey, Camille, that was actually really good. That was, I'm taking an organizational leadership class right now, and I actually had an assignment last night on, would like asking, what's your leadership style here in this corporation? Would that be a good company culture question to ask?
So that doesn't necessarily reflect company culture. That's very manager specific, because like I think I manage different than my manager manages, which is a-okay. It's just different. But that is a good question to ask specific managers, but like I wouldn't necessarily ask the recruiter that because they don't know. But yeah, that's absolutely an okay question. And you can ask about what an organization's philosophy is behind leadership, or what their philosophy is behind their employee engagement and things like that they should have an answer for.
Certainly appreciate your time today, Camille. It's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. Everybody give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
We really, really appreciate it. We do have a number of guest speakers and opportunities for students to talk to professionals, but we don't always get to talk to someone who is actually doing the hiring. So there was just so many good nuggets of wisdom today. Any last thing that you want to share before we kind of send you off?
Yeah, I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me. I love recruiting. It's something that I think is great. And I think it's the cool part of HR because we get to give people's jobs instead of disciplining them. But if you all have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My email is camille.dhennin@foodchainid.com. Daniel has my contact information, so he can share that. You're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just send me a little note letting me know where we know each other from. But you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if that's something you feel like you'd like to do, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Awesome. Thank you again so much.
Of course. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care. See you.
Bye.
Before everyone leaves, there are a few announcements. So